Lanny's dad. I wake up, fists clenched and buzzing, certain of someone downstairs, someone in the house. I used to get this a lot, but I'm more accustomed now to the sound of the village. I know a hedgehog making his way along the planted borders. I know the postman's early footsteps on the gravel. I know the alien hum of Mrs. Larton's late-night tumble drying. This isn't that. This is a human body moving. There is someone in my house. I don't wake her. I get the cricket bat from the wardrobe and the little bones in my feet crack as I tiptoe out of the bedroom. My pulse is loud in my ears as I creep across the landing and pause, listening at the top of the stairs. Nothing but my thump, 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 gingerly down the stairs. Nothing. The words in my brain from the script of terrified male homeowner. Come on then, you fucking fuck! And the bladder squirm because I have no actual defensive power. I am not brave. I do not fight, have never fought. I work in asset management and only fight in quite subtle ways on Microsoft Outlook. I am terrified. There's nobody in the kitchen, but it shits me up being in there, imagining someone looking in, loads of them, lines and lines of men with Hessian faces, with razor wire and acid, farmers by day, killers by night, invisible just beyond the window pane, watching one of their numbers stalk me through this house. Jesus! It scares and humiliates me, so I start to swagger a bit, performing the just looking, in case I am being watched. How daft to be worried about what people think, even as I genuinely think there is an intruder in my home. Nobody in the hallway, nobody in the lounge, no axe between my shoulder blades, no shotgun pointed to the back of my head, behind me just the corners of my house. In front of me just a dark interior designed by my stylish wife. My own reflection, and I fling open the understairs cupboard and I feel a proper chest pain, an angina spasm of dread, and then there is a tight squawk from upstairs, Robert! I run up 3 steps at a time, imagining with absolute conviction and clarity that there is a big man in a dark cloak in my bedroom, and he has a knife against my wife's throat. And so I stride in, bat raised, and she is sitting up in bed. I heard something. Me too, I can't find anything. My ballsy woman, she looks terrified. She whispers, in here. There's someone in here. There's someone in the room. I run over, bat in hand, and I jump into bed beside her, suddenly childlike and not at all brave. I think of newspapers printing photos of our blood-stained walls. My heart is whumping in my chest. Is he in the wardrobe? Is he made of the sheets? Is he in the ceiling? Is he in my wife's skin? Is she hiding him? Can I kill a person? Will it hurt? Will he torture us? I'm frightened. A rustle and a movement right here under us. There's a man under our bed, in our bedroom. We're going to be killed in our beds. She's gripping my hand as hard as she gripped it when our son came ripping his way into this world. I need to do this. Maybe it's a lost cat or a frightened refugee or a dying fox or a robed poltergeist. I need to do this quickly and surprise myself with bravery, so without too much pause, curiously calmed by the recognition that she needs me, that I am caring for her, I swing out of bed. I roll and land on the floor with a thump, and I raise my arm ready to swipe the bat hard across the carpet, ready to smash the bat again and again into the face of a man. And under the bed, eyes wide open, possibly asleep, possibly awake, is Lanny. Lying stiff and long like a rolled-up rug with his arms by his side under our bed, gazing beyond me. Our child. No expression on his face. Later, we are awake, talking it over. She says, I was too angry. You called him a fucking freak. I know. You need to apologize tomorrow, but he's grown up. He's grown up enough to know that he gave us a fright and I was angry. He needs to stop doing things like this. It's worrying. You need to apologize to him. I know. I was appalled. I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever been more frightened in my life. Would you like to spoon? Yes, please. Pete. Pete is Lanny's friend. He's an artist. I just noticed. I thought they were all looking just above your head.
That's why I wanted to disappear. It's okay.
Is it making you feel uneasy? What if I stand a bit closer to you?
That's better. Much better.
Pete. Very strange mood. Drunk a few beers, then some whiskey, then some not ready slow gin. The sound in the village was all wrong. I went for my walk around the block and got the ill feeling and hurried back. The darkness was uneven, slippery. I sought refuge in my kitchen, but the pressure between different objects in my house was all wrong. Something was bad. I had a glass of drink on the table, a newspaper and a pen, and the three of them were fit to lift off and explode. Things were closing in. I sat and breathed 6 in, 6 out. On the fridge was a postcard from my friend Ben, a marvellous. He was an English artist of the early 20th century, mid-20th century, watercolour artist who focused on very romantic rural scenes of the UK. Beautiful artist. I've treasured it for years. I looked at this image, this lovely English thing, and I felt sick. Bile in my mouth, neck sweating like a fever. I grabbed it off the fridge and I was going to rip it up, but that didn't seem to satisfy the hatred I felt towards it, which was something long, something accumulated. I necked a load more gin and stared at the postcard, and I hated that quaint image, and hatred for this card had seemingly been hiding under the surface of my quiet existence for God knows how long. My whole hateful, guilty life queued up, ready to land on this poor image. I loathed it in ways I'd been keeping about my person, in my beard, in my ears, under my fingernails, since my parents told me to sod off because I was a faggot and a disgrace. Since I first read those pamphlets about what the brave Englishmen did in Bengal, did in Kenya, did in Northern Ireland. Since I first watched animals slaughtered. Since I first sold my fucking soul to a London gallery, to a glossy magazine. Since I first saw supermarket carrier bags in the throats of rotting seabirds. Since I saw behind the crematorium curtain to the giggling assistants dropping ash on the floor. This all queued up, these painful things, and I don't know what was going on, but I was steaming now. Growling, vexed, I got a biro, and I sat down and I very carefully drew lines across that postcard. Then I rotated it and drew lines across those lines. A grid to obscure the lush Wiltshire hills, the mysterious Neolithic bullshit, the pleasing clouds, the lovely chuff-chuff two-dimensional train. Fuck every lying English watercolour acre before and after it, every moron riding it, and again and across, hatching away, tightening the grid, marvellous, disappearing into the dark night again, poor man, shiny black ink smudging and denting and obliterating the nice gesture of my friend Ben. I did not know myself. I did not know what on earth I was. Lanny's mum. I can't sleep. Robert's breathing sounds like a small door catching the carpet as it opens. Click, scuff, somebody enter, click, scuff, somebody leave. I usually sleep well. The village is tight and muggy tonight. When I was very unwell, when Lanny was a baby in London, I read all sorts of things designed to scare young mums about cot death and crushing, choking and allergies, flat skulls and bent backs, damaged eyes and bad milk. And one night I woke up and Lanny wasn't breathing, and I accepted it. I accepted it easily. It was the middle of the night and I was thirsty and I'd forgotten my lines and the duvet was boiling. I'd been dreaming about that film where the man in the barn pretends to be Jesus. The streetlights were toxic yellow through the curtains and the baby had died. I lay very still. I didn't touch him. I didn't scream. I didn't move or wonder where Robert was or panic or cry. I lay still and I could think clearly. It's over now and you can have yourself back, I thought to myself. This tragedy will be the whole story of your life, but it's your life. And you can sleep forever and ever if needs be. You have won sleep and lost fear. No more baby. I remember that night and I strangely cherish it. Robert farts, an owl makes half an owl's noise. I am comfortable in my bed in this house in the countryside, and I remember a bit of a prayer or a lyric about passing unharmed through fate's unkind embrace. Dood papa schoenwortel. Schoenwortel. In German, he's alte Papa Schuppenwurz. In English, he is dead Papa Toothwort. Dead Papa Toothwort steps up from a brown puddle and walks through the village dressed like a normal bloke, flat cap, rain mac, sensible boots, out for an evening stroll. He whistles his song, and the song is a set of private instructions. He feeds his plan into this ordinary home county place, sliding it like lubricated wire into the soft flesh of the village, into buildings, gardens, sewage pipes and water tanks, up the lane to the big house, round the back to the sports pitch, into the beer pumps, into the books in the classrooms, into the gas and electric, into the bell in the church tower, sucked into nostrils, rubbed into cotton, into the bodies of men and women, folded into sweaty creases and scratched into red eyes, into the dreams of the children and the bones of sleeping house beasts. And he whistles and whistles and gives so much he can hardly hold any idea of himself together. Exhausting. He has done this before, but never with such sincerity. He means this terrible thing. He's meant it forever. He makes a once-in-a-century effort, whistling his dream into being, setting this village up for its big moment, and by the time he gets to the edge of the woods, he is crumpled into nothing more than a whiff or a suggestion. He is only silent, warm, crepuscular danger. And the badgers and owls have seen this before, and they know not to greet him, but to hide.
Thank you. That way we've met some of the characters of the book. It's
Not very helpfully. You've met them at a moment of crisis.
yeah, in the middle of the book. This is exactly in the middle.
Well, yeah, it's the end of part one, yeah.
And then comes part 2 and part 3. You read it much faster than I thought.
Well, time is money, you know.
Yeah. We can stay longer.
People in Brussels are busy.
We can stay longer. We don't have to commute.
I think it's okay to read it fast if you're reading it with me, maybe.
Yeah. It took me a longer time. It took me some time to read it. I did it very slowly.
I hope so. I hope it's a book to be read quite slowly.
Yeah.
Because it's patterned across the whole, so if you rush parts of it, they won't echo in the way they need to echo later on.
Mm-hmm. At first I thought, well, you know, you read a bit and then we talk about the characters and that way we glide into the book. But then I thought, no, let's just start with a quote from the novel describing exactly what these words, these 200 and something pages, did to me. And it's a lot. She's caught between what's real and what's not, moving through the partial air, through the solid trees. She's like a camera panning across a set. It is a sheer torment, but she is also suffused by a deep gratitude, a drug-like bliss of appreciation for what she's being shown. That's what happened. But it's strange that it happened, because it's a book where a reader can see the structure so clearly, and still you get drawn in. How did you do that?
I don't know how I did, but I can tell you why I did it, I think. I'm very interested in structure, and one of my primary concerns as a writer is that I think that readers are very accomplished. And I think you can and should make that assumption as a novelist, that your reader doesn't need to be spoon-fed things. You can do things experimentally with form and style they're not indulgences, they're not to please or impress me, and nor are they to impress the reader. They are integral to the content of the book. And if you've got your reader on the side, you can do it, and they will go with you. And I discovered this with my first book, which had a lot of white space, which required a person to project themselves in. And I thought this time, based on that assumption, based on that finding, that readers don't flinch from things as long as you've got them. And I mean by that a combination of intellectual and emotional factors have engaged the reader. Then when you say, okay, I'm completely changing the register into magic realism, or I'm removing all character names, so you've got to guess who's speaking, or any of these things I do which would possibly be preposterous if you hadn't done that groundwork, are fine, because the reader is there with you. And they're like, okay, I think I know, by the end of part 1, by the end of the section I've just read, I hope you know the characters well enough, both in inflections of their speech and their grammar, but also their politics, the nuances of their relationships with each other, the way they are in relation to the community they live in. I hope that when you then put everyone in a white mask, so you don't know who's who, the reader is with you in the guessing game of who's who and why they might be behaving in the way they're behaving. And that, to me, is immensely good fun, but also I hope on my part, an act of an inclusion. I don't want...
Because it's not a guessing game, is it?
No, it's not, but it's a game of recognition. And I want that. I want the reader to be playing that game with me. If I'm playing it on my own, it's like, oh, I'm the novelist in this separate space, building this artificial world that you're not. I want to say we are building an artificial world together, in which your identification with these people, your complicity in some of this stuff, is absolutely integral to the success of the project. So if by the point you've just read, you are feeling like there's a roof on the forest floor and there's also a roof up above who's got these sort of panoramic abilities and can see things in situ, then that's just the perfect response.
Mm-hmm. But you could also just choose to bury everything under the green and don't let the structure be so obvious. Because if somebody would tell me, please don't listen to me now, that the structure is so obvious, then I would say, wow, that's not for me. Okay. But then I read it and it's like, of course it's for me. It's a dangerous game if it's a guessing game.
Yeah, then you
high.
just have to be the stakes are high, but they are in any novel is an experiment. I don't believe in a distinction between novels that are experimental or not. They're lesser degrees of the same experiment, which is here's a made-up world for you to believe or not. I think you mustn't over-egg anything if you're doing a thing like taking away all the names or playing around with time. The most common response to this book in the UK has been people saying, I thought I'd hate this, but I loved it. And so I'm an amateur psychoanalyst. And tell me why you thought you'd hate it. And some people say, oh, I saw words moving around on the page and that made me think of like pretentious poetry. Interesting. What's pretentious about poetry? You know, like without that pretentiousness, we never have anything moving forward. We'd all have to write shopping lists and nothing more forever and ever and ever. So I want the alarm bells to ring, and then for the material itself to be the embrace. So even as you're suspicious of it. Same with the child, this kind of empty centre of the book. I want you to think, this kid's a bit of a prat, and then actually realise maybe you're a bit of a prat for feeling that way, or you can certainly identify with the dad who thinks he's a bit of a prat, and that makes you feel guilty, and that's why he's feeling so guilty. So all the time you're being dragged in and then pushed back out to the fact that it's a novel.
Yeah,
and I
you
hope
show us that, right? You really, as a writer, you show us this is a novel. Don't forget.
Yeah. And I hope that the physicality of it as well, which Veskapev so beautifully imitated in the translation, it's about truth and artifice the whole time. So you're like, this is just words on a page, but because they go everywhere in this bit, they're obviously not the novelist's words. They're something else. They're sound, and I want therefore you to be like that splitting you describe is really helpful because I want you to be hearing the voices in the way that you read. You know when you read and you hear the voices in your head? And I remember a teacher saying to me at school, you need to stop that, Max. She said, you can read faster now. You don't need to hear the voices in your head. And I thought, oh, no.
You make a living out of it.
That's the whole point. Yeah. I was doing all the accents, But also, it was about the same time they took away the pictures as well. So I was like, Christ, you're really ruining this stuff for me. Mm-hmm. So my dream is that you would be that rather than just sitting and saying, a novel is a realist mode. I'm going to meet people like me and I'm going to read them doing stuff, and at the end I'll decide whether I liked it or not. Like, yes or no to that experience. What I hope you'd be like, there's a sort of baseline here, which is events are occurring, but there's also this kind of patterning, and I find as I read, I can hold them both in suspension. So I am myself becoming a kind of polyphonic player in this ensemble. And that's what I love most about reading books, and when they activate that music in your mind. And therefore, the book is more indebted probably to the oral tradition or to a performance tradition than to the realist novel.
Yeah. You refer to it as an object, because it is an object, and even like the cover, the outside is very important to you.
Oh yeah, I'm a fetishist for the book, but also
What is this?
Paper.
It's more than paper. It's life.
I think it's more than paper. I think it's life. But also, now we have all these questions about how our attention spans are divided and bloody blah and. What is touch and what is the physicality of the person in the room, and this is a thing that you are going to spend 12, 16 hours of your life with. More, right, exactly, and then again, 32 hours. That's where my maths stops, but and you are physically involved with it. I mean, sure, you can read it on a Kindle, but most people are going to turn the physical pages of this, and therefore, as parent, think about touch. I talk a lot about the surface of this child's skin. You don't know his name, you don't know how old he is, but you do know these sort of hyper-realistic, almost erotic register of touch, the tiny little bits of sort of fluffy blonde hair on his knees, his little scab. And similarly, in the discussion about art, much of the art in the book that they make together, these people, Pete and Lanny, is not made. It's just a verbal exchange, an exchange of love to do with the touch. How do you make a shadow? How do you tease an image out? How do you just get acquainted with the page before you've even made a mark? And all these sorts of things. And so, yeah, it's highly important that the book is turned around and considered as a physical object.
Is it a fall in time?
The image?
Mm-hmm.
It's abstract. I think of it as a border between two people, or between trespass and invited, or between public and private, or rural. I think of it as the charged space. Yeah.
You said their exchange about art. It's also just the big question, right? What is art?
Yeah, and what is education as well is a very important thing here, because he's been asked to teach the child, but there are, quite pointedly, for political and personal reasons, there is no grading, there is no lesson plan, there is no structure, there is certainly no target, and no one is ever going to introduce concepts of right or wrong into this relationship.
That's not the 21st century.
I know. Oh my God, in England you wouldn't believe it. Maybe you would, I don't know what it's like here. But we're grading these poor little people before they've had a chance to learn to run or climb or imagine.
We do that too. In Europe we do that too.
I know. That's why we must break free from the shackles of the European project.
Shoot as fast as you can.
Joke! So when I rip off my shirt and I've got some hideous fucking UKIP slogan on me. I smuggled my way in under the auspices of this hippie project to make my point. But I am of the school, obviously when you read the book, I am of the school that what this mythical character, who we'll get to I'm sure, is attracted to, is worshipping, is recognizing as a genuine life force in the context particularly of late capitalism, where most people are defined by where they live and where they work and what they buy, or where they're from, or what they are other to. Out of it, for him, rises this extraordinary sweet spot, which is for him almost godliness in the secular sense. And it's this child who can cruise along on still with the eccentricity and pure storytelling magic of childhood. He's imaginative and funny and a bit odd, but he's also in tune to the adult world. He thinks he knows that he should be a tree worshipper because trees are something to admire. Why would people get so fixated about their car? You can't take any of that with you. He's already thinking about longevity in planetary, cosmic terms, and that's, to some people, deeply offensive New Age bollocks, but to Lanny it's completely pure.
He's a child.
I know, but children.
Because you describe him as a very, and he is, exceptional or a little mystery. But he's a child. That's the main essence of him, the nucleus. He's a child.
Yeah, and therefore that's why I don't need to describe him, because he's a child as you know children, or I know children, or you all know children. And
We've
therefore,
been children.
Yeah, I still very childish in most ways. Or I certainly feel a great tension in my day-to-day life between my instincts and my so-called adult responsibilities. And I genuinely find the grown-up world crushingly limited in its adventurousness in terms of what we might all be thinking and feeling, and also so bizarre, given the basic facts we all know, i.e. the longevity of the planet and the formation of things geologically. And why fixate on why invent strange narratives of nationalism and stuff? Like, it seems, from a childlike perspective, the kind of questions your children ask you. Why? I can't explain it. Hundreds of years of male stupidity, mainly, is my main answer to my son. Because you can be more analytical, but basically that's it. You're sort of like, the problem is mainly men. Mainly white men. Broad strokes, that's kind of the issue we all face. And actually, when you tease it down those avenues, my son's recently, because he reads this junior newspaper, and he read a thing about white supremacy. And I just flippantly said, because I was cooking, I was like, it's kind of the main, it's like the main idea it's the main problem, it's the main idea. All the problems in the world basically come back to this terribly stupid idea that white people are superior. And now he's totally on it. But he'll be like, look at a cornflake packet and there's a picture of a kid in it, and he'll be like, white supremacy. I mean, no, we all eat cereal, it's fine, shit, what have I done to this kid? But yes, that straightforwardness combined with that enchantedness, and how having children can both re-enchant you by tuning into the way their brains, magical brains work, and the formation of language and song and all that, but also utterly disenchant you because it's boring and they're annoying and you can't afford them and all the things. So your being a parent is to be staging this colossal war with yourself and others.
But at what point does the why stop? Those questions, because the book is also about innocence and experience, and when you, well, that might be another border that Lanny might be going through. When does it stop?
Well, I don't. When does it get crushed out of a child? When does it develop into something else?
Yeah.
That's why I wanted him at this point. I say he's never aged, but he's probably 10, 11, not yet pubescent, I don't think. But the point is that he still has this, and he hasn't lot, and he's understanding that. And then at the end, we don't.
Don't say that.
No spoilers. Yeah.
I wasn't asking for an age. I was asking for the. Yeah, is there a moment? You just said, I feel very childish, which is good because you're an artist, and Pete is an artist. I'm putting it very bluntly.
Yeah. Do you mean that the answer might possibly be self-consciousness?
Might be.
That age ends when we become self-aware, and that there is a terrible loss when one becomes concerned about what other people think of you.
And that's what artists always say. Like it takes you a lifetime to start drawing again like a child.
Yeah, and that's why Pete's only real educational gambit, his only real thought, is play. Let's make marks. Let's make mess. Let's experiment. And I think that I haven't because I whittle the book away so it's less is more with all these encounters. But I hope that I'd be interested whether it exists in the Dutch translation in the same way as it does in English. But the sense that nothing is ever really needed. That as that might translate into other areas of life, i.e. your relationships or your work, you might not need to specify that. Like the best teachers you ever have are the ones that don't answer your question directly about what you should be doing. Like, when do you need it in? Whenever you're done. And I used to find that really, just tell me when you, because I just like a job. Just give me a job and I'll do the job. But the teachers were quite rightly saying to me, well, you need to decide if you want to do it and how you want to do it and when you want to do it. And therefore you look back 20 years later and realize those were the great teachers, the ones that put some thoughts in your head that really grew. There was no fight, there was no closed door. And I think that's precisely the thing with the novel for me, is that I want all the doors open, interpretively open. So is it a metaphor? Is Dead Papa Toothwort a metaphor for the environment? There is no yes or no answer to that question. Is it about innocence or experience? Is it about does Pete represent adult world as child? All of them open.
Also.
All of them, yeah. And I want that. I desperately want that, because ambivalence is freedom, and the novelist should not be despotic about meaning. The meaning should float free off and around the book. If you aim to be interesting, I hope. So yeah, the answer is always sure. And this book has acted like a mirror. So men write to me and say they're quite shocked to just recognise themselves in Robert.
And the dad.
You know, in very simplistic ways, i.e. they spend too much time looking at their mobile phone and they haven't engaged with their kid for 3 years. That's a sort of separate thing, but also existentially, like, I don't know where I belong type feelings. Similarly, women have written to me expressing some gratitude for the character of Jolie and the way in which she is both extremely self-critical and worries about herself and relationship, but is also proud of those dangers, realizing that within the maternal relationship lies hatred and fear and pain and abject, the good enough mother and the bad enough mother and all this. And that's the nicest possible thing, because if I'd locked them down, it's like, again, going back to illustrations, like the terrible pain of reading Rebecca with a picture of Rebecca on the front. So I can't do any of the work du Maurier is asking me to do in imagining who Rebecca might be and what she might look like. So there was originally a cover for this which had a little boy on the cover. I was like, I'd sooner burn the thing. I really would. I'd sooner bin it than do that work, or even have it in that even in the realm whereby it would be illustrative. The whole point is it's non-illustrative and therefore open.
You mentioned that you hope that in the translation some of it is left. How difficult is it for a writer such as you are to let go of that, to trust it?
Well, I'm translated into Dutch by Saskia, who I think is a very brilliant translator, and there's various ways I know that. It started as a hunch for me that she was very good based on some of the questions she was asking me, and then various critical responses and the responses of people I know that read both languages confirm that for me. She doesn't ask me many questions, but the questions she asks me are utterly the questions I'd be asking myself, or that I would be worried if someone hadn't asked. She's so spot on. With the first book, it was bird-like. The prose moved as like a bird, and it was a very unexpected thing in my life.
It flew away.
Yeah, so flying away was no problem.
Yeah.
This time I am a bit more concerned about it because of the specificity of some of my critiques of the way that the language is so tied to the place. And because what could be more awful than an English novel that tries to make some relatively subtle points about England and loses its subtlety in translation. So I'm a little worried about it. I want to let go, but I suppose really what I would like to be is comfortable in an interrogative relationship of implicit trust. I want to trust people, and we're all a family. Language people are a family. Anyone interested, anyone going to a book reading, anyone hanging out, anyone reading this stuff, we're already in a good place together. We're a small community of people that get that nuance is important and that don't be afraid to ask me. Like even my French translator, who's a brilliant translator, he said to me, very few questions on this, and I was like, Charles, ask them all. So it turned out there were quite a lot of questions. He said, can I just double check that fruit machine is a test for homosexuality? Charles, like, no! The fruit machine's just a machine in a pub that men put money in and lose. But he'd found something online where a fruit machine was a sort of aggressive test for gayness. And I think, God, imagine how many more things there are like that in all my books. Especially when you've got, in this you've got Hungarian people slagging off the taste of a beer, you've got very religious people being super righteous with their puns, you've got village gossips being quite specifically unkind to each other, you've got casual xenophobia that is on the cusp, and if it tips the other way, then it becomes fully blown xenophobia, which actually isn't realistic in that environment because people are quite subtle in the way they're awful in England at the moment. So yeah, the letting go, but hopefully not.
Yes and no.
Yeah. What I do, I make a point of saying, please just do give them my email address. Because I had a terrible experience with my first book. I think I've probably said this in Holland before, where I feel I'm among friends, and you mustn't say this if you ever meet my Romanian translator. She said, is it okay if I just call him Raven? And I was like, this is a joke. This is a joke, right? That would be like, absolutely not.
It's not really.
That would be like Roald Dahl's translator saying, can we just call them wizards instead of witches? No, it's a whole book about witches. So yeah, I supply my email address and I beg for it to be used. Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the subtle comments on England. It's a village. It's situated in a village. Is it important that it's an English village?
It is.
Okay. Because we don't know that. I mean, we don't live in an English village.
No.
We know English villages, but not the way. We don't know the subtleties you give us.
Yeah, and I couldn't write a Flanders place.
No, but it's.
I'm sure there are.
It's not that different.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
And I'm not into it. Exactly, and it's
but
the job of the novelist
different,
to find out about things, and the whole cultural appropriation argument. I would love to write a Flanders village, but I would definitely come and spend a good amount of time here. I'd need to drink your water and have sex with your sheep.
You get a hunch of how we do it. Okay.
The thing about the English, yes, it had to be an English village because I'll try as I might when I first was thinking, should I give up on this book, should I do it? Because I wrote this book 10 years ago as a poem, and it was just about a friendship between an old man and a boy. There was no mythic element, there was no chorus voice, nothing. It was just an interesting relationship about the idea of innocence and education.
Maybe it's still a poem.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, why not?
Well, certainly I
What's the
lifted a
difference?
lot of it in.
Yeah, but
Well, exactly, and I don't buy the idea of a prose poem either, or poetic prose. Like, if the language is good, that's what I want. I want it to be exacting, and I want individual sentences to be lifted out on their own and have an electric effect, and that's the aim of any writing. Should be, I think.
But you were saying, so
well,
it
the
was
English
a
thing,
poem,
I
and
thought,
then
oh Christ! I mean, Brexit's been such a hideous thing to behold and to be in proximity to, and I thought, God, the last thing I want to do is write a book about England. And yet, I have a conflicted relationship with this place. There are aspects of England that I adore, particularly the landscape and particularly people like Pete and of the artistic variety. People who love myth and fairy tale and folklore and the peculiarity of this island's relationship with its own origin stories, but they are not weaponizing those narratives against others. They are simply curious, beautiful, funny, strong ways of telling story.
deeply rooted.
Yeah,
Also.
and utterly connected to the Norwegian tradition or the broader Scandinavian tradition or the African folk tales or whatever came in on boats to this place, because we've always had this incredible melting pot. So then when I started to do the village voice, I thought basically now I have a kind of set of options available to me. I could have terrific fun and just satirize, and that's not quite what I needed here. Or I could try and get it absolutely truthful and try and do that tenderly. I've since been reading a theologian who some of you may have read, called Richard Holloway, brilliant thinker, beautiful thinker. And he talks about compassionate impartiality.
Compassionate impartiality.
Yeah, so that I don't need to know who you are, I don't need to know anything about you, I should be able to forgive you for what you've done wrong to me, purely for the radical philosophy of forgiveness based on my compassion towards you. And that as a methodology that is about as extreme as you can get as a human being. To literally not care what someone's done, but be ready to forgive them on principle, even if they've done the most grievous harm for you. It's truth and reconciliation, basically. He's friends with Desmond Tutu. So, he's got some pretty good exemplars of this. But I thought, wow, what a wonderful way of thinking about the novelist's responsibility to the people he's writing about. It's very easy to just pillory people. There is a character in here called Mrs. Larton, who is a Daily Mail reading old bitch, of the type one has in one's own family, possibly even in one's own personality. Certainly, never. It's like rats in New York. You're never further than 10 meters from one of these people in the UK. And it's not interesting for me to just send her up. It's not particularly interesting for my reader, and I'm very into novels being generative. So I go a fair way in creating her as a character, but then I also put her, I set her up in relation to someone else who has quite different concerns, and they're both angry, but they're both, through their anger, drawing out something more loving and more understanding. And then in the patterning of the voices throughout the book, you start to understand a little bit why she's like what she's like. And then the functions that one could be super snooty about, like, gossip or hearsay or just crass assumptions we make about one another. Actually, behind all those things is truth. There's a reason cliché exists. It's because people say it a lot. There's a reason stereotypes exist. So if you just go that little tiny bit, just lift it up like it's a stone.
We're again at the 2 levels.
And you just lift it, and there's the worms. There's the worms in all of our characters, and there's
the lid.
Yeah, and that's the job, I think, of the village, of these things, is that I just take, and there's no poetry in it, and there's not even any punctuation in it. They're individual lines. But, for example, mad Jean Coombe, crazy Jean Coombe, she wears a Santa costume, she's fucking mad, is 50, 60 pages later, you hear something about Mrs. Coombe, who was hurt as a child. And then 50 or 60 pages later, you connect those two. She's Jean Coombe. And I don't want people to fixate on that, because it's not an Agatha Christie novel where you say, I think I've worked out what's wrong with Mad Jean. But as in real life, you might just make a tiny connection there. And that's empathy. That's the point, is that if you listen and you think about other people in relation to yourself, not as two-dimensional characters to be slid in, but as modelled as you are, then life is terrifically interesting the whole time.
And then there's a village speaking. But did you struggle with that? How to get to that idea? I mean, how to make it into an object?
Oh no, I loved it. It was originally going to be a block along. Has everyone looked at the book? It dances around.
You just showed us.
Just I haven't got many hand signals. Okay, this is the only one I can do.
You can do it.
It's better than that.
Let's keep
It's
away
a sort
from
of
that.
village voice. What I wanted was it to look like sound, and therefore it had to break the conventions of the printed page,
Okay. Yeah.
and how to do that without it being a gimmick. It is a gimmick, but I hope it's a gimmick quite tightly harnessed to its purpose.
Once again, it's form and content. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it goes over the edge of the page and stuff like that, and I want that to be, and also it darkens, so actually, again, we're talking about the physical relationship between reader and book. You actually have to get a bit closer. You have to actually try a bit harder to read, and what you're reading is darker, and the actual function of it in the narrative is darkening. So I hope that, people have told me they get sore shoulders, or they stay on the loo too long, and these are all great things to hear, because it's a bodily enterprise. But my research for it was nil.
It came naturally.
Why don't you just sit and listen to people?
Just
It's so good. I mean, my mother-in-law's amazing. She talks in these long kind of monologues of gloriously banal information about, well, Graham said that actually he'd seen Trina, and Trina said he hasn't actually had the op, but it's weird because he limped. And I said, why do you mean limping if you haven't actually had the operation? I said, what about one of those bendy plaster things from Boots? And she said, I'm going to put one of them on him. He's already got gangrene on his knee, so I'll just get the spray, but the spray's too expensive. And you're like, I'll just take that. Right in here, right in this novel I'm writing in your living room while you look after my children.
It is an English village. Yeah.
And then a few notice boards. I like notice boards in villages. Like, there's a list of, one of them was list of bell ringing, or list of services at the church or something. And someone had written on it, bell ringing's moved to later because of, I can't remember what it was, Pam's knee again. Everyone's got bad knees. And then someone had written under it, Pam is just fine, thank you very much. Pam. Like Pam just having this brilliantly meta meltdown about timings. And then you go along and there's only 3 people there anyway. It's just Pam, Pam, and Pam anyway. And they all live next door. So that kind of thing is fun. But then I wanted it true. So it's a home county's place. Do you have that expression here? The towns within commuter distance of the city? Which in England means that it would have been a place even 60 or 70 years ago that would have had an agricultural identity.
Yeah.
It would have had its own industry.
You have it everywhere.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
And now it's just a city near London, a village near London. And that's one of the conflicts in the book. But therefore, if you take one of those places, you would still have a bit of agricultural community. There's farmers still. You would have some immigration, but not a lot. So in your average English village of that size and location, you would probably have 1 or 2 Indian families. Most of the builders would now be Polish builders, but there would be some antagonism between them and the English builders that had lived there and inherited from their parents, family businesses. So I populated it as realistically as I possibly could.
There would be some nature left.
And there'd be a little bit of nature left, but it would be a very visible place of that meeting ground, as we haven't talked about him yet, but if there was a spirit.
We're waiting for him.
If there was an oak tree watching this place for 1,000 years, then he would have suddenly noticed in the last 50 or 60 years a fuckload of chemicals being pumped into his roots. Suddenly we
And around his roots, it's still a bit silent because a village is a very noisy place, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of noise in the book.
Yeah, because it's noisy in our heads, isn't it, anyway? And the idea, she says the idea of it being quiet. She had this kind of urbanite idea that you'd get to the village and it would be quiet. And she's like, it never stops. Bird song, banging, hammering, singing, people going, morning, knocking on the door, the postman on the thing, farm machinery, there's a local airfield. It's a noisy place. Or it's noise that you hear, because when you're in a city, you just don't hear it anymore, do you? Yeah.
Let's get to the Green Man.
Okay.
The mythological figure.
Do you have such a figure?
Do we have a name for that? Do we have one? I've been thinking about it. Do we have that? The Green Man? Less than you have, I think. We have, you see him everywhere in England, right? On every door of a pub in every village, like sculptural also. uitgehouwen uit hout, ook een mannelijk, it's a man, right? So he's a man with a long beard and long hair, it's made out of wood. Every piece of him is wood. He's a green man. I see you thinking of something.
Nothing.
No.
Well, he
Still, we know what it is.
you know
Yeah,
what it is.
but I
you
hear s- I
you
hear some
recognize him
noise.
if you saw him. Yeah. Well, the point is, he's
But it's not a name. We don't have a name for it, do we? The Wildeman? Yeah. Might get close.
I mean, in the UK,
Scheurwortel?
in the UK, he has extraordinary longevity because he was a pagan symbol of fertility and the natural world, and then the Romans used him, and then the church used him, and actually borrowed a load of his iconography in the
See
way.
him everywhere,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And so there is much to the nationalists' fury, who'd like there to be an England of about 600 AD, where we were all pure Englanders, tilling our fields and scything the land, and the green man was like strumming on his little lute, and all the children were rosy-cheeked and happy, and we made our own cider. This never happened. We were Danes, we were always something else. We're immigrants all the way down in the UK, so it is funny how we have these. There's only a couple of them of this longevity, but we cling to the green man as if it's truly us, which is sort of what I'm poking fun at here as well. Is that if you accept him as I do, as a pagan voyeur who has existed on this land since before it was even named or divided or had any people living on it, then what has he seen? He has seen languages come and go and change and solidify. He's seen the church arrive. He's seen the land chopped up into pieces. That's a major thing for him. Enclosure. He's seen the Industrial Revolution. He's seen witch trials. He's seen civil war. He's seen people hurt each other in ever more creative and interesting and now sinister ways by just pumping drugs into each other. It's a fascinating thing if you just imagine him being able to go through it in 5 minutes, like a time-lapse video. But therefore, what might I've already said how he feels about the boy, but what might he feel about for example, Brexit? These things are tiny blips on the landscape for him, but they are nevertheless symptomatic. He is worried that we are getting less and less connected to what we are, less and less connected to the land.
To the roots.
Less and less grateful, less and less aware that actually we are breathing the air made for us by these trees, so we can't chop them all down. If you pour a load of chemicals into the water, you can't drink it, and you need water to live. If you don't know whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall, then you are not going to be able to protect yourself and the people you love. So he's got a serious kind of eco-ecstatic point to make, but I don't need to make it. I never make it. It's just in him and in the relationship between him and the boy. Yeah, he's there and he's in all of us. That's the thing about the depth of the kind of Celtic metaphysic that we all have. That's why the whole idea of, oh God, he's a hippie. Well, in which case, what system do you think capitalism is the better? The more, is that got life in it, really? Beyond this climate crisis? It hasn't really, has it? You aren't going to be able to buy a new fridge on Argos.com if we've got no water to drink. So, and again, that's Lanny. Lanny says that, like we all said it when we were 10 years old, when we all did those projects at school on the environment, and we all felt burningly sincere about it, and our parents all at one point or other, be it our actual parents or the generation above us or our school teachers or our newspapers or our politicians, all rolled their eyes and said, there's nothing you can do about it, or you'll get over it, or you wait, you want a car, and that's the crisis that's played out in the relationship between these people. But as I say, I never need to say that. It's just there in the book.
Why are you apologizing for? I'm not saying it. Why? I hear
Well,
you
in the
say
same
twice,
way as like
I'm not a hippie.
no, I'm a total hippie.
Okay. There's nothing wrong with being a hippie.
No, God, no. I think I'm not saying it in the same way as I'm not comparing myself to Jane Austen, but Jane Austen never really talks about the Napoleonic War. I don't think you need to ladle it all in there. No. I think it's more interesting if it comes out of the cracks.
But it almost, another crack, but it almost feels as if you say, because there's let's just call it a green theme in it, like, you don't want it to be too overtly there.
Perhaps I regret not making it more overtly there, in as much as it seems to really annoy a certain type of middle-aged climate change denier. So great, because I just think those people are in trouble. And also that kind of, a lot of that, as I said at the beginning, the kind of, I thought I'd hate this, but I loved it. It's like, well, why are you limiting your exposure to things that you might love? You know, and in the same ways, why has it been such a long time since you went out and just took a deep breath of air, or looked at it, or hugged a tree even? What I want is not necessarily directly related to the environment, because in my first book I did this to do with our love for one another and appreciating people while they're alive, or continuing to appreciate them long after they've died, that kind of enriching of the mourning experience as ecstasy, as love. We can do it now. This is a sort of, it's a book about doing it now. And the kind of existential challenge of that, but also bliss of that. If every encounter with your child has factored into it the idea that that will be finite, both because they're going to grow up, but also because they might go missing, or because they might get stolen by a mythic green man, then every encounter is going to be richer.
Now.
Yeah, let's do it now. And that's hope. So I suppose there is. I couldn't have made it any more subtle, because if I'd made it less subtle, if I'd made it any less subtle, then I would have been taking from the reader the opportunity to do that work for themselves. Like if I described the mother more in my first book, she wouldn't have existed in absentia, and she's so much more powerful in absentia, because we know how much they loved her.
Mm-hmm. Somewhere it's near the end, you say, false thing endings. Sustenance for fools, and never what they claim to be. Writing novels and means at a certain point there has to be an end.
Fairly soon after you've started, in my case.
Ah, really?
Because they're so short, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But they're not that short. But I'm often very disappointed in endings, because they tend to be or explanatory or, look at what I found. Got you there, didn't I? That sort of things. Like, I don't need an ending. Maybe I just don't need an ending, but there has to be an ending. Is that difficult?
Oh, I love that you say that.
It's good that you made it explicit.
I did make it explicit, yeah, because I couldn't resist giving Peggy, who's this old kind of wise character in the village who's lent on her gate so long it goes like that. She says, false things, sustenance for fools. I just totally agree with you. I think short stories very often end brilliantly.
Because they're so dense.
Exactly. And the brilliance of the short story depends very much in how it ends. So that it has an architectural unity. Poems, very often the brilliance of a poem is in its ending. And I liken it, I came up with this the other day and I'm pleased with it, so I'll use it again now. Say the poem is a room, but it's dark. You're in the dark when you're in the poem, when you're reading the poem. And the end of the poem, be it the last word or the last line or the last stanza or whatever, flicks the light on in the room you've just left. So now you're out of the poem, you can't see or hear it anymore, but the lights are on so you know what you've seen. That's the job of the end of the poem. And some perfectly ordinary poems become great poems for me in the way they end. And that's I realised why I read poetry. I'm reading and reading and reading in the hope that someone's going to do a Dickinson, as I call it, whereby you read and read and read, then you put the book down and go, ooh.
There's a light.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, she just chucked on all the lights. Novels, you're right, they're so often underwhelming or tricksy or too self-conscious, or they kind of, it's like Prospero. He's just...
Sustenance of fools, yeah.
Well, but he's just like this just all the scenery's just fallen down, and there's just a bunch of shabby guys in black t-shirts pulling ropes.
Look at us.
And thanks a lot, I've just given you 16 hours of my life, and you've just exposed yourself as a cheat, a fool, lazy. Anyway, some endings are great. My feeling about it was... do you read those books when you were a kid that had a choose-your-own ending?
Yeah.
Ruth, less so.
I really have a problem with endings, but it's okay.
So you wouldn't want 5 of them?
Even not there, yeah. As I sometimes don't read the last pages, because then I'm afraid it will blow it all.
Yeah, I've had that where I've stopped a book 3/4 of the way through because I'm loving it, and people are like, well, don't you want to know what happened? I absolutely do not want to know what's happened. No, yeah. Well, anyway, I was going to do it with 5 different endings, one for each character. And so you would choose which of those endings you felt was true in the spiritual sense, not necessarily the practical sense.
Okay.
One of them is going to be really wild. One of them is going to be that kind of wild. One of them is going to be moderately magical. One of them is going to be utterly, crushingly, horribly banal. there was going to be a kind of Mrs. Larton tabloid ending as well. And I wanted all these endings in play, and that seemed to me true to life, that we all have there is no such thing as a definitive ending. We all have our own interpretive space in relation to what we've known. And that seemed to be, in a kind of structuralist way, interesting. And I told Faber that was what I was going to do, and they went, okay, like that. And when it came to it, I just realised, A, I could have that
It's all in there.
I could have those choices built into the actual ending. Secondly, it would have been a cop-out, because I'd spent 2 years of my life with these people really, not like my first book where it was a sort of formal experiment and I was getting out. So I built them, you know. I built Robert. I know him intimately. I didn't put it all in the book, but I did the work that I'd read that novelists do, you know, when you speak to great novelists and they do that work. Like Hilary Mantel in her Tudor books, knowing every single thing about the fibre of Tudor life and none of it in the book. But we know it's in the book. We feel it in her characters. So I did that for all of them, and I thought, now I owe them an ending. And I particularly owe this kid an embodied solution to the problem of who he is and what kind of person he is. So I did it, yeah. I wrote an ending.
You wrote an ending.
How did you feel about it? I
But
mean, we
without-
don't want to give anything away, but did it annoy you?
No, it did not annoy me. No, not at all. But I was very glad that you made it explicit
Mm.
in a very subtle way, as you do in all of the book. But you explicitly said, well, here comes the ending.
Well, it's sort of like,
Sorry.
yeah, well, it's sort of like saying, look, I know this is, as an enterprise, quite preposterous and possibly going to offend you, but
Go ahead.
but we're all friends here, so here goes. Like, and therefore, like, crack open my rib cage,
Sure.
heart on the page, here goes. Like, if you're going to do it, let's do it. And I fully expected people to be annoyed by it in a kind of jump the shark way, you know, like crazy ending, lost me a bit at the end. Interestingly, no one has said that. People loved the ending, and people that are very cynical about unusual things happening in books have loved it.
Okay.
And I think it's because we don't want to. I promise I won't spoil anything.
Okay.
But I think that is to do with what we were saying earlier about the work that they've done. It's not really to do with what I've done at the ending. It's the work they consider they've done through parts 1 and 2.
Yeah, because you take us to a place in part 3 without spoiling anything, and it's the big end, not the ending. You take a, yeah. Everybody's there?
So she hates books with endings, but she loves books with mini endings, secondary endings, tertiary endings, and
Okay.
ultimate endings.
Part 3.
And then show tune endings.
Part 3 is, let's say, the ending. You take us to a the E. You take us to a place.
Sounds awful.
It's not an easy place to take
Yeah.
us to. It's very, I mean, we've talked about the ambition of the book, but this is very ambitious. It's between the realistic and the magical, and you know, and as we've said, that you know, you show us sometimes it's only a book. I'm writing it. It's not real, but then you take it to another level, and it that must have been. Well, I would think it's difficult
I felt
to
really
take us there, to dare to take us there as a reader.
Yeah, I felt excited by it because I'd wondered whether I'd like writing a novel from scratch, and I wondered whether it would interest me, and I wondered whether it would give me the tingles, you know. And then I found myself, having written most of this book, in my office with all these drawings of trees on the wall and root systems and drawings I'd done of Lanny's dad carrying Lanny up the stairs and stuff, where I've been trying to think about musculature and what it actually means to pick up a kid that age and how it's actually really awkward. And in that awkwardness is pain and the love of parenting that is, you know, and I really, so I was kind of knackered, but also really fired up. And I just listened to the Moonlight Sonata again and again and again and wrote that third part, feeling like there is a great deal at stake for me. And I'm thrilled to discover that. I not just cynically sitting down and writing book 2. I was like, I need to talk to my dead relatives and my wife and my kids about this. I need to phone my brother after I finish this scene and tell him I love him. You know, this is it. And I was grateful for that.
And there was no other way.
And I wasn't striving for that. It had arrived and there was no other way.
They took you there.
Yeah, and also children's books took me there.
Okay.
The memory of reading books at around the age Lanny is, you know, when you just zoomed into books and your parents can't get you to do anything else because you're just looking at books the whole time. Just before I gave up on books, actually, interestingly, just before I stopped reading books to go and snog girls. But that kind of age, when you like, the example that keeps coming to mind, I don't know if anyone's read it here, you'll have your own in your culture, but there was a book by a writer called Susan Cooper called The Dark is Rising that's been a very influential book to various people in the UK, including people like Robert Macfarlane. It's about another world. It's not a sci-fi book, but a boy encounters someone who says the dark is rising, and he realizes he has the responsibility to stop. And he's having very, very ordinary Christmas with his family, pulling crackers, and just that close to him is this other world that he knows he has to go back into to save things. And it was that extraordinarily exciting and totally unshowy movement between our world and another world that felt like it spoke to me as a kid, like the mission, the response in the secret, can't tell anyone, but I've got to, all that. And I thought, well, I mean, fuck it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Why not? And for an adult reader, but also particularly for a literary reader, because I know I said I don't believe in these camps, but I have to accept that most people that are going to pick up this book like literary novels. And God, I hope I get some other readers. I did it! I know. Like literary novels. I've really got the wrists for that move. I might use that one again. That they are going to be either extra appalled at that leap, as it were, at that door swinging open, or the most accepting of it. And particularly, again, this is why it has to be an English novel. Like I spoke to a very lovely Dutch, I think, Dutch journalist earlier, and he was saying, I was completely unfazed by that, because a lot of the contemporary fiction I read fearlessly moves between registers and worlds and has funny typography and can do that. So in England, it less so, because we are more silo-based in our reading. Is it sci-fi? Is it literature? Is it kids' books? If I borrow from them all, then that's a true representation of the way I read. I don't go into my son's room and be like, lend me one of these children's books you speak of for children. I just read his books because they're better than most of the adult books I read, and the plotting's really good. And you get rabbits with swords and stuff, stuff I want. So to have Pete walking along, Pete we know, realist man, you've met him, you've heard me read him, he's a normal person. He's walking along and he realizes that he is walking in the mirror image of his village. He realizes, he's an artist, that he is in the block that has been cut to print the village. That seems to me like a pretty crazy thing to put in a book, but you just say it.
Happens,
It's only 2 sentences long and it's happened.
You take us to that place, but you also take us to thematically a very dark place about parenting. Because now we've talked about a lot of things. Oh my God, you turn all silent.
Next question, please.
We've been to the Green Man, Brexit, the end of the world. I mean, noise of a village. It takes a village to raise a child, and go on. Who can we trust? Can we trust parents? And you take us to a very dark place. You must be. I mean, as a writer, I understand, but it's not that easy to go there. It's interesting, though.
It's not that easy to go there, but it shouldn't. It is easy if it's hard for it's harder for men. Robert is underdeveloped in a way that I see in many men of my generation who have become lazy and addicted and unadventurous in artistic and spiritual terms. They don't think very hard about things. Ethics, responsibility, guilt, complicity, what answers they might have to give to their children. They just kind of crack on because they're tired and they want to play football on Saturday, and they just watch 75 episodes of Game of Thrones. And in amongst all that, there isn't much time. And I'm not suggesting everyone should be reading Kierkegaard at night or whatever, but one has to think carefully about life. And all I've done with these characters in the ending is been as truthful as I possibly can about the thoughts one has. So the thoughts he has, for example, about sex and about the fact that maybe all of this, maybe no one actually loves one, maybe the whole thing is fake. Maybe no one actually loves anyone. You sort of feel you have to because you're raised as a kid and people say love. You love food and drink, and sometimes you feel endorphins in your or your testosterone kicks in or whatever. But actually, the idea of caring for our children, maybe that's just fake. It's a pretend. It's a kind of elaborate economy of artifice. And I wanted him to have these thoughts and to be confronted on those thoughts. Almost as a kind of honesty challenge to myself and the reader. So I know you've had those thoughts. Like the passage I read with Jolie and the baby. I've read and spoken to and loved enough people, not just women, but people who have had those thoughts and more importantly found those thoughts tremendously clarifying.
And reassuring also.
Exactly. And in those abject moments of self-disgust, do you find the necessary energy to keep on loving, or to refresh the love, or to even find the love curious and surprising and provocative and onward? That is onwards. That's onwards movement. There's a kind of moment of incredible clarity that he feels, a bit like the one she feels that the baby's dead. And I don't think it's the novelist's job to have those moments of clarity. I can't give them to the reader to have them precisely in situ.
That moment.
That's not. You're not going to have the same thoughts, like him going off and admitting that he has a sneaky wank. I don't want male readers to go, oh, I've done that. But it's more the invitation to a degree of self-analysis. And I hope it's completely separate. It should be. I think it would be utterly grotesque if that was attached to any moral scale on the novelist's part. Like, you know, when you hear novelists saying, I want my readers to think very carefully about their responsibilities to immigrants. That's not the job of a novel. That's the job of journalism. That might be the job of teachers. Yeah, the job of the novelist is to build a world and let your reader wander off into it. And therefore the ending, those challenges, and those questions, I felt like a kind of knuckle-cracking, particularly because of the way that our culture is so, I don't want to say game show obsessed, because Trump's kind of spoiled that by becoming a kind of orange-faced game show host in chief.
And it's too much already.
Yeah, it's sort of ruined the analogy. But what I mean is that the kind of the idea that it comes from a Christian tradition as well, that you're going to get to the gates and be tested. The idea of a test, and of course there is no test, and there certainly is no winner or loser or runner-up prize. The point is that your life is one long test with no prizes, apart from the ones that you can gift each other. And so what I like, even if it costs a marriage or costs or needs a colossal grief. Like I would relate this to my first book, the extraordinary clarity one has when one is grieving, and how you might imbibe that into your character as you grow up. So the loss of a parent as a child is in fact the most extraordinary gift. Obviously not one you would wish on anybody, but in terms of the formation of a character in relation to others, in, as I said, the empathy game that is life, what a gift to lose someone you most love. And that sort of startling. Like, I remember my son was ill when he was very, very young. And I'm someone that finds it quite hard to focus because I got all sorts of stuff jangling around in my brain. And I'm also quite I'm at my happiest when I'm walking along a shingle beach looking for pretty shells or nice bits of wood. And I read in a book today someone describing looking for something in the forest, and she says, I have small thoughts, not very often. And that's me at my absolute happiest, is going along going, boom, 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 boom. Nice stick. I'll have that. That's me. And then you sort of, oh, mobile phone bill. Oh, these things, that's life, isn't it? With just all of us in a kind of soup of our thoughts. My son was ill, and I was in the hospital with various different consultants coming in saying he may be either dying or going to be fine, and we just didn't know what was going on because we were getting so many mixed messages. And in the glorious way that the NHS functions as well, they all spoke different languages, not very well. So I was at a certain point, I was like some awful racist. I was like, can someone just tell me in English what's wrong with my son? And then you get some incredible Greek guy with like 55 degrees saying, okay, Mr. Porter, calm down. You're like, I'm so sorry, I just said the worst thing, didn't I? Anyway, in that moment of great fear about the health of my child, all the things one thinks about in a slow and sludgy way disappeared. Nicotine cravings, hunger, bills, work, email, everything. It was like the most powerful drug. I was so focused. I remember thinking to myself quite quietly, wow, I don't remember feeling this clearly about anything ever. It was like an extraordinary drug. And obviously that passed, and that became part of the relief that the child was okay and onwards and everything like that. But I do remember thinking modern life affords us very few of those moments. And so what I wanted in the book was to put under the microscope the parenting, the structure of a relatively ordinary and uninteresting heteronormative family relationship under a microscope which is suddenly totally global in
What
its...
if?
Yeah, this happens to all of us in different circumstances, in war, in peace, in illness and in health. There are these moments when everything falls away and you're left with clinging to these empty formulations we had of loyalty or fear or health, and how does a person feel in that situation, especially when you've got the voices of your closest and your neighbours and you think all flooding into it as well. Like, what's that like? So that's what I did.
You're good at endings. We're nearly there.
Have I converted you to
you
endings?
You just finished the whole thing.
Yeah.
One more thing. You said, I can use the loose wrist.
Yeah.
But like you did this a few times, but the loose wrist is also in the book. As a few times, you don't remember?
Loose wrists?
Sorry, I'll get it. You don't trust me?
I mean, I do.
We are drawing a ball of plants, and I'm trying to get him to slow down. I'm asking him not to panic if what he gets on the page doesn't seem to relate to what he sees. Start again, ease up, loosen your wrist.
Yeah.
That's how he must try to draw it. Comes back a few times, 2 times.
I thought you'd mark the page. But
I'm
did
good
you
at
plan
endings
this?
too.
It's extraordinary.
What is it?
Said she was the best in town.
It's a small town. A lot of gossip. A lot of noise, a lot of gossip.
Yeah, the other chair would be like, no, where is it? Hold on.
I'm a bit embarrassed now.
No
But
offence if
what
you do that. Do you do the finger-licking thing?
No.
No offence if anyone does it, but I love it. I was on the radio with someone recently, and because it was on the radio, and I wanted to say, she just licked her finger. But she literally, I'm not even going to do it because it's too unhygienic, she put her finger all the way to the back of her mouth, seemed to root around for some liquid, and then turned the page with it. And I could see the print on the page. And also the page was loose. You could have used an oar. Anyway, carry on.
The loose wrist always comes when it pops up, when it's about making art. Is that a desire to write with a loose wrist? What is that?
It's a liberation from any expectations. It's being in tune with what you're making, not with any presupposed idea of it, or what a publisher's asked for, what you think your reader might want based on the reviews of your last book. It's it being up and walking. And this is what I mean about the oral tradition. Is can it be spoken up? Can it come up amongst us all and be heard? Is it song more than literature? So therefore, even if I am sitting in my study tapping, am I feeling that there's something coming out of the computer as well as going in? Is there energy and rhythm? And if I get stuck, if I were to get a large piece of paper and a very sharp pencil, would what I'm typing be as interesting, as fluid, as rigorous, as disciplined and impactful as if I were drawing? And that's why the book finishes with this movement of a hand across a blank piece of paper, onto which, even before he's made a single mark, I could read it, couldn't I? Because to misquote it would be disappointing. He starts by moving across the page with just the dry heel of his hand, not making a mark, just letting his arm and his eye and the forms he's looking at become acquainted. And then in confident strokes he starts to draw. He starts to draw roots, starts to let them take shape on the page. His line leaps and pesters at the idea of roots. And the roots play at being bones, tangled bodies, burnt buildings, ravaged metal frames, industrial leviathans, profiles, serpents, knots and cavities. And he smiles then, because as he darkens and works, they start looking and feeling like tree roots. And that's writing a novel, really, for me. Start with the line about a piece of fluff blowing in a room, and then build it a little bit. Yeah, breeze obedient balls of fluff, which is for me 20 years old. I wrote that in a notebook ages ago. And then up, you've got a man in a room, and then up a bit more, you've got his history weighing on him. You've got his anxiousness about what he does for a living and how he's defined. You've got a bit of sexuality in there, and none of this takes long. It's all just half a line here, half a line there, and then you've got a paragraph, and then if it's me, I'm like, oh, too baggy, too cliched, rub it all around, back down to the breeze obedient fluff, build again, and that is flight drawing. And the like you're just a beautiful interviewer, because we are back round to that's a physical relationship between me and the work. Yeah, it's to do with being in a body, alive now, breathing air with other people, and trying to get down onto these. Because this is not unique to our culture, but it is pretty odd. I'm reading a book by an Amazonian shaman at the moment, and he talks about the danger of us in our culture with our notes on, with us locking things into the page. And I realised then that the kind of tyranny of the text is the constant invitation to keep it loose and open and fluid and interesting.
Thank you, Max Porter. Please keep writing.
Thank you.